But for all their loathing of the Jews, the Nazis quickly hit a problem. Legally, who actually was a Jew? How do you define Jewishness? It was easy to tell the so-called Ostjuden, immigrants from Eastern Europe. They wore the readily identifiable garb of orthodoxy and spoke Yiddish. They had their own culture and ethnic identity. And crucially, they practiced Judaism. But very few German Jews did the same. They had lived in the country for centuries. These German Jews were fully integrated into German society. Going to the same social events as Nazis. They wore the same clothes, ran businesses supplying the state. They were indistinguishable in appearance or practice from so-called Aryan Germans. In fact, they were Germans.
Hitler bringing out the Nuremberg laws was his attempt to bring order to his racial policies, to organize four groups of people, the Aryans, the Jews, and then two new racial categories, half-Jews and quarter-Jews.
Hitler's Nuremberg laws defined any practicing Jew or anyone with 3 or more Jewish grandparents as being fully Jewish, whether they practiced Judaism or not. These full Jews were deprived of their citizenship, denied the right to vote, and excluded from public office. But that wasn't the end of it. Hitler didn't just target full Jews. Germans who had 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents were targeted too. These people were labeled Mischlinge.
Mischling singular, Mischlinge plural are horrible terms. The Nazis used these terms to describe what they called half-Jews and quarter-Jews, half-breeds. The literal definition of Mischling is mutt. They use it for dogs of mixed breeds. But the connotation back then was that you were subhuman, you were inferior.
2 Jewish grandparents made you a first-degree Mischling or half-Jew. 1 made you a second-degree Mischling or quarter-Jew. Suddenly, this new law labeled many people with distant Jewish relatives as half or quarter Jews. Initially, persecution of these part Jews was less severe than for full Jews. They were restricted on who they could marry and had to obtain a certificate of fitness for marriage.
In the race laws, half-Jews could only marry other half-Jews. Quarter-Jews were allowed to marry Gentiles, but they had to get special permission. So it was all regulation of sexual behavior, and if you deviated from the group that you were supposed to interact with, you could be brought up on the charge of Rassenschande, racial defilement. So if you were a half-Jew and you slept with a Gentile, you could be brought up on trial and sent to jail.
Nearly 2,000 people would be charged with racial defilement. Meanwhile, half and quarter Jews instantly witnessed how their new status affected their lives. Then in November 1938, there was an event that would raise the stakes for all Germans of Jewish descent. An orgy of Nazi-sponsored anti-Semitic violence erupted on Germany's streets. Synagogues were burned. 30,000 full Jews were arrested and 100 were killed. It became known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass.
His commanding officer notes, he's a natural-born orator. His fanaticism and populism captivates listeners, forcing one to think as he does. Hitler says, at that moment, I understood that I knew how to speak. From his beginnings, Hitler knew how to escalate intensity and to feed his listeners exactly what they wanted to hear.
I'll make our government open and transparent so that anyone can ensure that our business is the people's business. Justice Louis Brandeis once said, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And as president, I'm going to make it impossible for congressmen or lobbyists to slip pork barrel projects or corporate welfare into laws when no one's looking, because when I'm president, meetings where laws are written will be more open to the public, no more secrecy. That's a commitment I make to you as president. No more secrecy. And when there's a bill that ends up on my desk as president, you, the public, will have 5 days to look online and find out what's in it before I sign it, so that you know what your government's doing. When there are meetings between lobbyists and a government agency, we'll put as many of those meetings as possible online for every American to watch. When there's a tax bill being debated in Congress, you will know the names of the corporations that would benefit and how much money they would get. And we will put every corporate tax break and every pork barrel project online for every American to see. You will know who asked for them, and you can decide whether your representative is actually representing you.
Something magical about the gestures. Now, don't go like this, right? Because that is boring. You want to communicate. You want to be, I often tell my classes, you want to be more Italian. You want to use your hands. Let that energy flow. But notice the difference between this, and then we'll look at Barack Obama do this, between this gesturing up and gesturing down, gesturing down, gesturing down. Which is more authoritative? Which is more impressive? Which communicates that you are someone that needs to be paid attention to? It is down. You are literally planting your words, your perspective, your knowledge. You're planting it into the ground. And people will pay much more attention to you and regard what you're saying as far more authoritative than if your hands are going up. This is like, I'm throwing it away. It's not that important.
In Hoffmann's small Munich photography shop, Hitler, as always, inspired by Wagner and fascinated by opera singers' theatrical movements, studies a whole range of gestures conveying domination, which he will use in the first big Nazi rallies. Hitler states, the masses are feminine and stupid. Only emotion and hatred can keep them under control.
Deutsches Volk, hilf dir selbst! Jeder soll helfen! Diesem unerhörten Zwang beugen!
How did this Austrian, who seemed to come out of nowhere, succeed in conquering Germany? How did he sow the seeds of hatred and violence? And how did Hitler and the Nazis drag the world into the apocalypse?